Welcome in everyone to the Batfoot podcast. My name is Damien here with Matt and David, and today we are bringing you the Hall of Fame episode. Today we had the 2024 Hall of Fame class announced. We will go through basically our ballots and then go over each player as we go up and at the end give you who was voted into the Hall of Fame. But before we get to all of that, David, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing good. This is one of my favorite episodes. I love the Hall of Fame. I love the discussion around it. I'm really excited to get into it. We got a long one here this week, so looking forward to that. Had a good weekend. Race season's getting ready to start, so I'm kind of excited about that. And hey, the Cubs made a move. You'll hear about that one on the next episode of the Bat Flip podcast. This one's all about the Hall of Fame. Matt, how you doing this week?
Doing pretty good. Just been hanging out. I've been, you know, following the Hall of Fame stuff today. Following a lot of other sports, the NFL playoffs, and college basketball and stuff have all been going good. So we'll uh, we'll get to it. I'm ready for baseball season. It's less than a month from spring training now, so we're getting close.
Yeah, we are getting close. It's less than a month, and we still have, I think, approximately the top
Yeah.
75 MLB free agents left, give or take a few that haven't signed with the Dodgers yet. But anyways, it's been a great week here. I built a whole new desk this weekend, so if this setup or audio or something's messed up, I am completely sorry. But figuring it out, new things here. So let's start off with looking at the ballot as a whole, right? So this is the blank ballot that we had for the 2024 Hall of Fame voting. So if you're not, familiar with the way voting works, it's all Baseball Writers Association people that vote for it here. I believe you have to be a writer for 10 years before you get a vote. I believe I saw that today. In total, you get 10 votes as a writer per year. Um, Now, as a player, you need 5% of the vote to stay on the ballot. You need 75% of the vote to make it, and you get up to 10 years as a player on the ballot. As you can see right there, it's underlined where this was like Gary Sheffield's final year on the ballot. Any questions about that? I know you guys know, but I'm just saying in general. Um, so let's move on and look at what our votes would have been. So first off, we have David's ballot here, where you see he voted for Bobby Abreu, Jose Batista, Adrian Beltre, Todd Helton, Andrew Jones, Joe Mauer, Alex Rodriguez, Gary Sheffield, Chase Utley, Billy Wagner, using his full allotment of 10 votes on his ballot. So let's jump over to Matt's ballot now, where you see Adrian Beltre, Andrew Jones, Gary Sheffield, Chase Utley, and Billy Wagner, only using 5 of his 10 votes. And then we'll look at my ballot real quick. That saw me vote for Carlos Beltran, Adrian Beltre, Todd Hilton, Andrew Jones, Joe Mauer, Manny Ramirez, Alex Rodriguez, Gary Sheffield, Chase Utley, and Billy Wagner. So that's all of who we would have voted for as a Bat Flip Podcast Hall of Fame vote, technically. All that being said, I know I've rambled on here trying to get through all of this. Let's look at the results of what happened, and we're going to do this in different groups. We're going to have the 5 percenters and off that have fallen off the ballot. We'll talk about the 6 to 15 percenters, and then from there on up, we'll discuss everything else. So, guys, within the 5% of the ballot, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see from Jose Batista and down, and if you're not watching on YouTube, be there for the next one. We'll mention Jose Batista, Victor Martinez, Bartolo Colon, Matt Holliday, Adrian Gonzalez, Brandon Phillips, Jose Reyes, and James Shields. So let's go ahead and we'll start with Matt on this one. Who did you pick from this group that you exceptionally wanted to talk on?
Yeah, honestly, just a brief, like, everybody on this ballot is worthy of being on this ballot. Like, they're all really good baseball players. I just kind of wanted to say that first.
Absolutely.
Just getting on this ballot's a big time accomplishment. But the guy I was going to mention, Matt Holliday, he was a exceptionally good hitter for a long time, 15-year career. A lot of it was with Colorado for those first 5 years, where he was excellent, but he continued to be excellent in St. Louis after that for several years. He was never a very good defender, always a corner outfielder type, but put up 49.3 WAR for his career, which is pretty close to the kind of a threshold, over 300 home runs, over 2,000 hits. So he did hit a lot of the statistical thresholds, but of course I didn't vote for him. I didn't think that, I just didn't think he was quite there as a Hall of Famer, but he was definitely somebody that was close enough to be worth mentioning.
The Hall of Fame threshold is really interesting, right? Matt Holliday kind of fell into the same mold as Lance Berkman a few years ago, who fell off the ballot with a really good, case. I think Jason Giambi kind of went the same way. Good case, just not enough, you know, time behind him. And the other guy, I think you can make a case for is there's a couple of different ways you can think of the Hall of Fame, right? It's the Hall of Fame, so it's not the Hall of Skill, right? We know baseball skill, the skilled baseball players. We're going to talk about some of the most skilled baseball players who've ever played or later on in this episode, but fame to me also says, did you do something for the game of baseball that is kind of going to be remembered forever? And Jose Bautista is on our logo, right? I mean, he made threw a bat flip that's kind of like heard around the world. It's one of the more famously played YouTube clips, and it's coupled with like a 6 year stretch where Jose Bautista was probably the best hitter in the American League. So he's not a exact. It's not an exact science with determining this Hall of Fame stuff, but Jose Bautista's case was really interesting, and I would have voted for him in the hopes that I could have boosted him up to 5%. Obviously, with only 6 votes, he didn't get there. But I really liked the case for Jose Bautista in the sense that he was more than just a a bad deep fielder that found a home in Toronto after a few years, kind of a journeyman that managed to be a really successful hitter into his 30s. And um, I think we can take more time than just a year to analyze that, but because there were some guys who were on the 10th year of their ballot, we don't get to give out the votes for a guy like Jose Bautista. So he gets 5% off, but I do want to remember the bat flip heard around the world that is our logo and is the kind of the reason we call it the Bat Flip Podcast.
Yeah, it was a little form of the inspiration there for that. So let's jump up to the next category that we had, or next segment of the voting results page, and that's the 6 to 15 percenters. You can see from David Wright, Torrey Hunter, Francisco, Andy Pettit, Jimmy Rollins, and Bobby Abreu. A couple guys in here, have a decent case to get some more votes here. So who do you guys think within this aspect, should be getting a little bit more run than they are right now?
I think that out of those guys, we included Bobby Abreu in that. I definitely think that he's somebody who should get some more consideration. Even though I don't think I didn't vote for any of these guys, but and also Francisco Rodriguez is a guy who statistically on a rate basis he's kind of similar to to Billy Wagner in some ways, but I don't think he's there. He had a couple of like unbelievable seasons. You look at his, I believe it was 2008 season where he just blew away the record for saves, which, if you're looking at the save statistic, I don't know. There's a lot of voters who look at something who look at that. I'm not a huge fan of it because a lot of it's the situation you're put in, but he's up there on that list. So I'm not. I wouldn't be surprised if he got more consideration eventually. But Bobby Abreu is the guy here that I really think is a somebody who deserves a lot more consideration than he's gotten.
Yeah, it's good. I voted for Bobby Abreu. I'll get to him quick. Francisco Rodriguez had a total of 437 career saves, which puts him in the top 5 all time, I believe. So, at the very least, he's got a case as one of the better closers of all time. I just think, and we got another relief pitcher on here. Finding that threshold for relief pitchers and like who's the best relief pitchers of all time that need to go into the Hall of Fame, that's going to be difficult to come up with. And then as like Craig Kimbrell, Aroldis Chapman, some of these guys, Kenley Jansen, the dominant closers of late retire, we're going to have another discussion on this. And guys like K-Rod are going to come back up, I think, in this discussion. So I think he's someone who needs to keep on the ballot for a few more years so we can get more of a threshold on what those closers mean. The guy I want to put my focus on before I jump onto Bobby Abreu is David Wright. He only got 6% of the vote, and David Wright got to 50 career wins above replacement. Right, this is a guy who
the best third baseman in baseball for a couple of years there. In 2007, 2008, a guy I grew up with, and injuries just got rid of him from baseball after he turned 30, right? Effectively. So it feels a lot like the Andrew Jones case to me. If Andrew Jones had a few less homers, right? I mean, David Wright's on a rate basis was, I mean, maybe a better hitter, right? But he wasn't quite as good a defender at third base as Jones is going to be in center field. And I just think he needed more. He needs more time to marinate on the ballot to get more people on his side here, because this is a long process, right? 10 years is a long time. And as long as you can keep up those votes and maintain on the ballot, I like the chances for David Wright to gain some momentum and gain some steam based on having a really good prime and being kind of unfairly removed from baseball due to those injuries that are not his fault, right? But when he did play, he was one of the best players in baseball, and he's a lot like Joe Mauer in that he was a career Met, and Mauer's a career Twin, and we'll talk about Mauer later. But I really like David Wright, and I'll go quick on Bobby Abreu. I voted for Bobby Abreu because he had a career 395 on base percentage and 400 career steals. If a player had that number in the 2010s when on base percentage was really important, he would be lauded as one of like the best players in the league. And Bobby Abreu didn't get that because he played in the era of Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and home runs, right, and batting average. And Bobby Abreu didn't get the coverage for being as good of a player as he was. And he was a lot more steady. He played a lot more years, which is why I ultimately voted for Bobby Abreu over David Wright in this group. But I think it's very deserving for Bobby Abreu. And, I think maybe if, David Wright was like my 11th guy, basically. I really like David Wright's case, and I think he needs to get some more luck going forward.
It's all reasonable stuff you guys are saying about these guys. A few of them, like I mentioned, do deserve to get some more run on this ballot.
Yeah.
So looking at a guy who early on in his Hall of Fame voting process got a little bit of run, I think he was up in the 50s or 60s, if I'm not mistaken on his voting, and has fallen down to the 17% or 17% on this ballot now. It's Omar Vizquel. We're not going to get into everything of why he's down to this far, but he's had a lot of off the field stuff. A lot of horrific things have come out about him. And one of the criterias that voters look at is what type of person you are. There is a character aspect to this voting. And sometimes, it bites some guys that should be in there, but Vizquel, the stuff that's come out about him has been absolutely horrific. So he's down to 17%. And I don't know if you guys have any comment on his proceedings on the ballot.
Yeah, I think just even tossing aside all the off the field stuff that was really, really bad and would disqualify him regardless of if he was the best player ever. I think that, his case is pretty bad anyways. Really, the only case was that he almost got to 3,000 hits, but he played for like 24 years or something, and he was not good for all 24 years, or for a large portion. His career high in WAR was in 1999. He had 6 WAR. Outside of that, his career high was 3.4. Like, he had nowhere near a Hall of Fame caliber peak, and he had a career 83 WRC plus. So he was like 20% below the league average hitter for his career. He was a great defender, but like, just the fact that he accumulated a gargantuan amount of hits while being a terrible hitter, and you know, like, I mean, just because he played for forever like that, I just don't think that should qualify somebody to be a Hall of Famer. So, he only put up 42 WAR for his career. Like, that's pretty far under my threshold. Like, you have to have over 50 for me as a position player. Like, that's pretty much my threshold on FWAR for a player, and like, he's not even close to that. So I don't think his case is very good regardless.
Yeah, and I at this point I'm like, you can have the internet, what he did, and you can find out, right? There's no point in voting for a guy like this whose case was based on, he's a coach, he's played forever, so he knows everybody in baseball. He was always good to the writers. Like, yeah, at this point, if you're still voting for him, you're ignoring the obvious, which is that you shouldn't be voting for him.
Yeah. So let's basically from here on up, let's go kind of player by player, and we'll dive deeper into obviously the ones that are higher up here. But Chase Utley, I mean, you look at it, he 28% of the vote, his first year on the ballot, but a guy that each one of us on this podcast voted for. So dive a little bit more into Utley's career and what makes each of you guys feel like he's worthy of your Hall of Fame vote.
Yeah, he was worthy of my vote, and that's coming from a Braves fan who hates Chase Utley. But I mean, I can call it what it is, and I think he's a Hall of Famer. I think the only case against him really is that he didn't get to 2,000 hits, which is one of those thresholds I was talking about earlier that voters like to talk about. But I mean, I don't think that that should disqualify him, because if he didn't walk 9% of the time, he probably gets the 3,000 hits if he just swings the bat a lot more. But either way, he put up over 60 WAR in his career. He was elite he was very, very good at everything. He was a fantastic base runner. The metrics loved his base running. He put up over 10, 15, 20 stolen bases just about every year. He was obviously a fantastic hitter, a career 118 WRC plus, but he really tailed off his last 3 years with the Dodgers, where he was below average as a hitter. But most of his career, he was excellent, and as a defender, he was awesome. And all that's playing second base, which is not shortstop, but it's up the middle defender who hits 260 home runs, puts up over 60 WAR. I really like that case, and he put up a 5-year stretch from 2005 until 2009, where he was over 7 WAR every single year for 5 years in a row. And those were on some really good Phillies teams. He was on the 2008 World Series team, and on the 2009 team that made it to the World Series and lost to the Yankees. So this guy was an excellent player. He led teams to memorable postseason runs, and put up the counting stats, in my opinion, to make it. It is kind of a sabermetric case, and that's probably why he's not higher up on the ballot. But I definitely am in the Chase Utley, should be a Hall of Famer club.
Me and Damien voted for Jeff Kent like every single time where we tried to do this, right? And we were calling out for it. Like, Jeff Kent's one of the best second basemen ever. Like, Chase Utley is like maybe number 2 to Jeff Kent and best second baseman ever. And he might even be a better overall player where Kent hit more home runs. And Utley was a much better defender. And Utley might be the best, like, steady base defender at second base over a career that's it warranted Hall of Fame consideration, like the best hitting defensive second baseman of all time. And he's the kind of guy who's got the postseason accolades, like Matt said. He's got the sabermetrics. He's got a lot of home runs, right? I mean, this is a guy who really should have more than, what does he have? I think 28% of the vote. His case is going to strengthen because next year Dustin Pedroia jumps on this ballot, and I think Pedroia is a weaker second base case for the Hall of Fame. And I think Pedroia's presence will force voters to compare the two, in which if they're looking to vote for Pedroia, who's a pretty popular guy, he's won an MVP, he's been a World Series hero, right? He's going to have, a ballot, people who want to vote for him. They're also going to be forced to look at his positional counterpart, which is Chase Utley. And I think Utley's case will move up as we go down. I'm glad he got at least 5%, and I voted for him because I think he's just the kind of guy who, he was always a terror to face, and he's the kind of hitter that I think needs to be represented in the Hall. Second base is very underrepresented in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and one more thing I'll add to you're talking about him probably being a guy who goes up a lot on the ballot. Every year, the sabermetric cases are getting stronger because of the way people look at the game. And Chase Utley's his sabermetric case is slam dunk Hall of Famer. His counting stats case is borderline. His his kind of persona is kind of borderline for people. But if you're like a big sabermetric person I mean, his case for that is like it's third or fourth best on this ballot. So
yeah, to me, and I'll be real brief with it on mine. On my voting for Utley, like he was such a player that did everything well. He did everything good. There was not really anything bad that he did to his case. He was an integral part of some of those great Philly teams. Like Matt mentioned, he had that 5-year stretch or 6-year stretch there where he didn't have under 7 WAR. And really, like, even after, I think it was in 2011 or 2012 when he got diagnosed with a patellar tendonitis. He was never really the same player after that aspect. But still, he was a really good player after those. I mean, you're talking about still 4 WAR in 2011, close to that in 2013, 2014. And then he really started falling off, at the age of 36 here. But I mean, he was just a player that was also extremely clutch, like a guy who you wanted up to take the big at bat there. And, a lot of the times I hate when we use postseason records against people, but he was one of the more stronger postseason players. And I think that does need to help part of his case as well. So that's kind of was my version of Utley. And I do hope that he gets more support here in the next few years as some people of this, start kind of falling off, we have that. So let's move over to Manny Ramirez next, who he's at 32.5% of the vote. And him and kind of A-Rod kind of lumped into the same group together here. But, a Hall of Fame worthy career potentially, but also is notorious for being a PED user and getting cracked down with suspension during his player career or his playing career. So what do you guys think about Ramirez, and does the PED factor, play into your voting or not voting for him?
Yeah, that's where I'm at with this, is that with the PED, I've been back and forth on the PED thing for a while, but I finally kind of decided my firm stance on it is that if a player got caught and suspended for using PEDs when it was being enforced, then I'm not going to vote for the player, because it was being enforced. Not everybody was doing it at the time. They were cheating. So Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez, there's a reason that both of these guys are so close together here, and it's because they were both cheating and got caught. And Manny Ramirez did multiple times. Like he served like 2 or maybe 3
I think it was 3.
suspensions. Yeah, so I mean, he was a chronic PED user when he knew that it was against the rules, and A-Rod was too. And A-Rod tried to hide the PED usage by using some like weird forms of it and stuff to try to hide it. So I think that both of those guys are kind of in the same boat. I mean, it kind of feels unfair to talk about both of them at the same time, but they're obvious slam dunk Hall of Famers if not for that. So I guess we kind of can. I mean, Manny Ramirez, 66 career WAR, 500 home runs, or 555 home runs. So a lot of home runs. A career 312, 411, 585 hitter, terrible defensive player, but his bat was so good. A 153 career WRC plus. Like the bat was so good, it doesn't even matter if he was a bad defender. Like, just put up some incredible years with, Cleveland, was an incredible performer for Boston, and especially in the postseason, had some memorable moments. And A-Rod is just inner circle, like, just one of the greatest players of all time. If you take out the PED thing, 113 WAR, like just an insane
Yeah.
career that he had. Best shortstop on the Yankees for a long time. Yes, better shortstop than Derek Jeter. Um, like he was incredible. So, but at the same time, guys who are blatant actual cheaters that got caught doing something that was known against the rules, and I just can't bring myself to vote for that.
So you'll notice I voted for Alex Rodriguez, did not vote for um, Manny Ramirez. And I'd be lying if I said, I was holding a grudge for 2008 when Manny Ramirez single-handedly knocked the Cubs out of the playoffs. But ultimately, it boils down to A-Rod's PED use was, to what we know, was pretty late career. But even if you just took before the Yankees, A-Rod had a better career than David Wright. It just before he got to the Yankees, which I've been here slamming my fist for David Wright. And A-Rod was better than David Wright before he got to the Yankees when he played for the Mariners and the Rangers. So I'm at like a point of, this is a guy who I think would have been a Hall of Famer without PEDs. I think, he was suspended very late in his career, to where even if I cut off, 100 home runs, if I cut off, multiple seasons, even if I take away his entire Yankees tenure, he's still a Hall of Famer in my book. And that's where I kind of feel like I have to get to do it. I think the hard stance is probably the right way to go. I think it's probably what's going to happen. But like Damian said, he's inner circle, like best player of all time type of player. Manny Ramirez is not that. Though Manny Ramirez has the latest 160 plus RBI season, which I think is always kind of an interesting statistic. And I always kind of wonder if anybody's ever going to get back to that number again that Manny Ramirez got to in 1995. But multiple suspensions for PED use. I mean, it's gonna be very difficult to vote for that guy. You have to be overlooking a lot because he got popped a bunch. A-Rod got popped the 1 year. I think I can overlook that more than for Manny, and that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, to me, like David mentioned here with Rodriguez, at least, I think he's a Hall of Famer even without the PED scandal. Whenever he got popped for it, I think he's a Hall of Famer anyways. It's the same type of way that I looked at Barry Bonds for years. Like Bonds was a Hall of Famer during his Pittsburgh time. Like before he ever got to the Giants, he was a guy who should have been in the Hall of Fame. And then he went to the Giants and then, everything else from there. But, as far as Manny goes to me too, like I look at Hall of Fame also a little differently than some people. I look at the era that people were in, if you can tell the story of that era without a player. And I feel like Manny he was one of the more lauded and, I mean, for lack of a better term, I guess, influential people, good or bad, in that era. Like there's Manny being Manny for a reason. That's where the whole thing in baseball comes up with. I just think that he's the type of player that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And even if that conversation, it's a good, bad conversation, like he's part of the conversation to me. And that's why I give him my vote on the Hall of Fame. He still has over 500 career homers. And I think at the time, like there's probably more people that used it, and he was active in the time when it was still being too. Sure, he got busted later in his career, but I don't know. I don't look at it as much of a big deal in a black eye as some people do nowadays with it, anyways. So let's move over to the next one, which is Carlos Beltran at 57% of the ballot, and a guy who, at least I would say, without the Houston Astros scandal of that he was a part of, he might already be in the Hall of Fame. But what do you guys think?
Oh, I agree. I mean, he's a guy that's, 67.8 WAR, 435 home runs, played a lot of his career in center field until his last, 5 or 6 years. Was I think he had 2,700 hits. Like, this guy would have been a slam dunk Hall of Famer. First ballot if it wasn't for the Astros cheating scandal in his final year as a player. But, it's kind of like with the PEDs line. Like, I mean, Carlos Beltran was the ringleader of that scandal. I mean, and I just can't get past that at this point. I think that maybe I eventually do, but I mean, I think that it's definitely something you can hold against him with him being the ringleader of it, and he got fired from a managerial position because of it, where he was going to be the manager of the New York Mets. So I did not vote for Carlos Beltran, although I think that my opinion on that could change in a few years. And I will say this too: there's a few other Houston Astros players who will be on this ballot in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years that I would vote for, even being a part of that because but Carlos Beltran's a little different because he was the kind of the leader of the scandal, whereas like a guy like Jose Altuve was kind of a victim by association to a certain level, or maybe George Springer, who probably won't be a Hall of Famer, but in his case was probably a kind of a victim of the situation. He was, the people around him. So I definitely like that. That's definitely a big black eye for me on Carlos Beltran in his Hall of Fame case.
So I didn't vote for Carlos Beltran, but I said Wright was my 11th. Beltran's like my 12th. And Torrey Hunter would have been my 13th for what it's worth. But I felt like there was like 15 players that were at least, I had to think about. And ultimately Beltran being a part of that scandal is what pulled my vote away from him and towards somebody else, especially like Bautista, who would have needed support, right? And ultimately one of the things that voters tend to do is they get through 9 guys. They say, okay, I've got my 9 that I really like, and I've got 4 cases that I think are interesting, right? Well, a guy like Carlos Beltran, who is in that kind of category of, maybe he's 7th to 10th on your list, but you might boot him off to try to support a low down guy like Torrey Hunter or David Wright or Jose Bautista that is close on, the 5% threshold, where they're not going to make it in, but you'd rather vote for them than put your vote on a guy like Carlos Beltran, who lost out on a managerial position due to his involvement with this scandal. And we don't really know like exactly how much he was involved. The stories indicate that he was kind of the one who began it all, but we don't really know what went down there. We're just kind of going off of what was reported initially, and all we know is, oh, it was a veteran player, and Beltran got fired, so that probably means it was him. But I just, maybe it's being overblown, and that's kind of where I'm almost landing at this point. Is like, yeah, it kind of feels like that might have been overblown a little bit, but it's gonna take me a few years to think about this one, and ultimately, I think he ends up back on my ballot in the future. Slam dunk Hall of Famer statistically, just like A-Rod, just like Manny, but it's a question of, how much do you want to punish this scandal? I think eventually Beltran does get in. He's starting at 57%, and typically those numbers go up as you cruise through this Hall of Fame candidacy case of 10 years. I think he does get in at some point. It'll probably be really good if he is able to come out and talk about it here at some point. And I'm assuming that as we get closer to him being elected to the Hall of Fame in a few years, he'll get a chance to talk about it, or he'll get rehired as a manager, and we'll be able to kind of forgive him as the Major League Baseball has. And that's kind of what I'm waiting for, to be able to kind of fully cast my vote for Carlos Beltran.
So I think it's funny that I am the lone Dodger fan here that will never forgive Carlos Beltran for 2017, and I voted for Carlos Beltran on the on my Hall of Fame ballot. Um, like I said, I will never forgive Carlos Beltran for 2017, but it's far enough in the past now for me to realize that in 2017, in his age 40 season where he had a 76 WRC plus and negative WAR, if I really just take that out, he's a Hall of Famer. And maybe that's me overlooking the whole thing and just moving past it now. But like, we have to move on at a certain point. And, to me, looking at his career, if you look at those Kansas City years and then into the Mets years where he was just insane for a couple of those years, he stands the test of being a Hall of Famer. And I don't think that the sign stealing scandal, whatever, him being the ringleader of it all, like, I don't think that really needs to affect it. Like, if you think he was a Hall of Fame player, don't let something in his age 40 season, last year of his career type stuff, like, really affect that. Like, it kind of looks at, it's not really the same argument, but it's kind of like, well, was he a Hall of Famer before it? Kind of like I do with the PED things. Yes. Well, then, sure, he like vote him. If he was a guy that we were talking about that was 50-50 or like a career, hey, he was a solid player, maybe we should keep him on the ballot, and then he had the sign stealing thing, then maybe don't give him your vote at that point and he gets kicked off the ballot. But he's a Hall of Famer before that scandal, and it wasn't like he did it for 10 years or whatever. Like, it was his last year, and we don't even know how much he really personally benefited from it, even though he was the ringleader of it. Like, we don't know exactly everything, and I think he was a Hall of Famer before it. So that's why he got my vote on this one. And I do think he eventually gets in, because at some time the media will have to move on from that aspect, and the writers will have to move on from that aspect of it too. So let's jump up to Andrew Jones now, where he got 61.6% in his 7th year on the ballot, trending in the right direction, but you never know. And Matt, I know you got some strong feelings on this one.
Yeah, this is one that just it boggles my mind as to why people aren't voting for Andrew Jones. The guy was probably the greatest defensive center fielder of all time. I mean, maybe one of the guys from the 60s or earlier, like Willie Mays or somebody could you could argue, but it's just kind of hard to tell with that. But ever since that era, he's the best defensive center fielder of all time. He like he put up over 430 home runs in his career. I mean, the only thing that is keeping him out of the Hall of Fame, and he did all this at a time where, you know, he didn't have any kind of connection to PEDs. Now that doesn't mean he didn't never use PEDs. I don't know. It's impossible to know, but he never had any kind of connection to them at all. Where, so a lot of the home run numbers he put up were more legit than some of the home run numbers of the time. But uh, you know, the only reason that I think that he's not being put on just about every ballot is because, back in his last 5 years, he played three of them in Los Angeles, Chicago, and in New York, and he struggled with injuries and just not and a lack of dedication really over those last 4 or 5 years of his career. And honestly, with the Yankees, he was actually pretty good. He just didn't play every game because he was injured a lot. But he hit up a 132 WRC plus in 2011 with the Yankees, but just they didn't like him. I mean, he was terrible for the Dodgers, and I mean so a lot of people who are writers who are watching him more when he was with the Dodgers and Yankees left that bad taste in their mouth, and then you know and then he doesn't get in. So this just to me, like, he put up memorable postseason moments. He put up a 2005 season where he hit 51 home runs while putting up 30 defensive value in Fangraphs calculations. Like, just, he held the Braves home run record for one single season until this year when Matt Olson broke it. But he he should easily be a slam dunk Hall of Famer. I don't know. I don't really understand the argument against him, except that he didn't play till he was 40, which, I mean, we've got a lot of guys in the Hall of. He would be like, he's probably, in my opinion, he's the second best case on this entire ballot. So, and he finished what, like sixth in the voting or something. Like, I just don't get it. But I mean, it is what it is. That for some reason, some of the voters don't like him. So
Andrew Jones, if he plays his last 6 seasons on the Braves and performs identically, struggles in 2008, has a couple of kind of sort of resurgent DH level seasons in 10 and 11 with the Braves, he's in no doubt slam dunk. His case is better than Joe Mauer's. The problem is that he not only did he leave the Braves, he left the Braves with a little bit of a, it was kind of a situation where he left them and that kind of opened the Braves downturn, and they kind of lost that, what was it, like a 13-year stretch of winning the division. That it kind of coincided with Andrew Jones leaving, and ultimately, um, this is the case of, I voted for Andrew Jones. I think it's an obvious choice, but I also thought Kenny Lofton was an obvious choice for the Hall of Fame. I also thought Jim Edmonds was an obvious choice for the Hall of Fame. Those guys got 5%. We've not done a good job of organizing out elite defensive center field play into the Hall of Fame for a long time. And this is another case of it's being misevaluated. It's for whatever reason, right? And Andrew Jones's case is pretty slam dunk. I think it's obvious that a guy with this many home runs, with this much power, with a well above average offensive performance over his career, also should be, with also the best defensive center field game, should be a Hall of Famer. It's clear that that's not registering because Jim Edmonds is like the second number 2 on this, and he should be there. And Kenny Lofton had elite defensive center field numbers and had a ton of stolen bases, and he's not there either, right? And now we can't get Bobby Abreu in because we couldn't get Kenny Lofton in, and we're all jumbled up because we haven't properly valued this stuff in the past. So some guys are looking at this as it's not, he isn't that good. He's not Mickey Mantle. He's not Willie Mays. Well, yeah, those guys were like, the best players of all time. Andrew Jones is simply, the best defender of the modern era in center field, but that should be enough for the era that he played in, the home runs that he's able to put up, the impact he had on the city of Atlanta as a black guy playing center field for the Braves. So, Andrew Jones is easy for me, easy yes, and I do look forward to the next couple of seasons because I think he gets in here in a few years, especially as we're going to look at Ichiro, and Ichiro compared to Andrew Jones should be pretty good, comparison. We should bring up Andrew to Ichiro with that. So I think that'll be good. But overall, Andrew should be in, and that's pretty clear to me.
Yeah, I think if you just take his Atlanta time and like say he retired after 2007, I think there's still an argument to look at him that he's a Hall of Famer already. Like he would be voted in at that aspect because he went to LA, performed badly there, and then became basically a journeyman after that, where still performing like he didn't hit. I mean, he had a 96 WRC plus in Texas, an 89 in New York his last year. But if you look at, yeah, he hit 214. He still hit almost 20 homers in half the season there in Texas. He went to Chicago and in 107 games there had a 121 WRC plus and 19 homers again. Yeah, the defense drops, but you always expect it to drop in going on your later years. And he was battling injuries there. Like, man, I hate that we later on in these years, if a guy turns into a journeyman and he starts struggling there, we're like, well, see, he wasn't good for 15 years. He was only good for 10 of his 15. It's like, well, that shouldn't matter. Like
So
if
with
he had a
Albert
10
Pujols,
or yeah, like if he had 10 or 11 years there, where if he retired at that time, he was a Hall of Famer. Like, why don't we just consider that guy a Hall of Famer then? And everything else he just did after that was just extra. Like, he had the 1 year in LA where he got negative zero point 0.1 WAR. He's at 68 WAR at that point. Like, he's still, you're talking about a guy who had 5 years of being a journeyman who still has 67 WAR. Like, this should be a slam dunk Hall of Famer, and I don't know why he isn't, considered that he is one of the best defensive center fielders of all time. He has over 400 career homers, 150 stolen bases, and a 111 WRC plus here. Like, it's just, it's mind boggling to me that we look at this guy and think that he's not a Hall of Famer yet, after 7 years on a ballot. So, jumping to another guy that I think is completely mind-boggling that he didn't make the Hall of Fame. We're looking at Gary Sheffield in his final year of the ballot, gets 60. I'm going to round up for him. He got 69 or 63.9. I'm going to give him 64%. He falls 11% short of getting into Hall of Fame on his final year of the ballot. So what do you guys think about Sheffield falling short of his Hall of Fame aspirations?
yeah, I mean, Gary Sheffield is a guy that I think the reason is because he had some connections to PEDs, but the argument of him, the evidence of him being badly connected to PEDs is not very high. He never served a suspension for it. And there's testimony out there that when he found out what he was taking was illegal, he quit taking it because he had just kind of been told by trainers, "Hey, take this; it's going to help you." And he tried his best to avoid things that were wrong. And this is a guy who I think the big argument is for the PED thing is that without it, he might not put up the same numbers that he ended up putting up as a whole. Because he's not he is a slam dunk Hall of Famer for me, but without the, probably maybe say the PEDs added 50 home runs, he might not be like at that point for some people. So I kind of get it, but at the same time, the PED allegations against him are not very severe compared to some of the others, like Manny, who served 3 suspensions. And he is a guy that, I mean, his hitting, I mean, he put up just insane numbers as a hitter. Like, he put up a 185 WRC plus in 1996 with the Marlins. He put up 62 WAR for his career, a 141 career WRC plus. Now, I will say this: Gary Sheffield might have been the worst defender in the history of baseball, because he actually had to play defense for most of his career. He had like 5 years where he played in the American League late in his career, but before that, he had to play defense every single year. And he was maybe the worst defender in baseball for a long time. So that probably holds down some of his numbers. But I mean, you can't take a guy who, had a career 393 on base percentage, 514 slugging percentage, hit over 500 home runs. He had 2,600 hits. Like, this guy, if unless you are somebody who believes that his PED allegations are severe and should disqualify him, there's no other argument against him. And I think that he's definitely somebody I mean, I voted for him. So I
It's
think he's a winner.
tough. Yeah, it's tough that Gary gets taken off here, and I do hope the Veterans Committee
They
overturns
will.
it. And
They won't. Because of the
it's
PED.
right. You've got a number of guys that are experiencing this, between Bonds, between Sosa, McGuire, Sheffield, right? And we just elected David Ortiz last year, who had the kind of similar flimsy connections to PEDs, and
I ultimately think it shouldn't matter in this case, especially because he never got suspended. And, he was he's the kind of player that didn't have the reputation because he was playing at the same time as the best players of all time, right? He never won an MVP. He wasn't getting those kind of accolades, but he was always a top, 10-ish player in his league. And, you know, I, Matt went over a bunch of the stats. He walked more than he struck out, right? And as we've said, especially when discussing Barry Bonds, PEDs, even if you were taking them, they don't help you hit the ball better, right? Like he was a very, very good hitter. And as Matt said, not a good defender, but again, he played in the National League his entire career, right? And the National League did not have the DH. Are we if you're stacking him up to like Edgar Martinez, David Ortiz, he was right there on par with those guys if he was playing DH the whole time. So I think Gary Sheffield should have been in. This is a mistake by the Writers Association, and they really like to get it in their heads that the PED rumors are something serious, and it's just that was the era of baseball that they played in, and as far as we know, Gary didn't do any. So how can we do anything but take Gary's word for it at this point? And I really thought he gave some interviews and stuff. We finally got to hear from him about it, and I believed him, right? Like from what he said he didn't use them. I believe him. How can you do anything else? He's got nothing to lose at this point, right? So, you know, it is what it is. But this is disappointing because Sheffield should have been in there. He was really good for a long time.
Yeah, I don't. It's another guy that I'm head scratching that it's not making the Hall of Fame. But jumping up to the last guy, or the first guy out, if you want to say the last guy up on our voting that did not make the Hall of Fame yet. In his 9th year on the ballot, Billy Wagner got 73.8% of the vote, almost assuredly guaranteed to go up next year to make it in his final year. But probably the best left-handed reliever in MLB history, and he's looking at a final year on the ballot. So what do you guys think about Wagner falling a little over 1% shy?
Yeah, sometimes relievers are a little bit difficult for me because I think just kind of the way I look at baseball, I look at players kind of how they're valued in general, and obviously relievers do not pitch nearly as much as starting pitchers, so their value is going to be lower. But you have to, some of the best ones of all time, you got to put them in the Hall of Fame because they're the best of all time at their spots, and I think Billy Wagner is one of those. He's a guy that put up 12 strikeouts per nine in his career, and in a time where strikeouts weren't as prevalent as they are now. Now you see several people every year put up 12 strikeouts per nine, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was unheard of. So that's incredible. A 2.31 career ERA. 2010, he put up a 1.43 ERA at age 38. Like, he never tailed off. He could have kept if he didn't retire, like he could have kept pitching for 3 or 4 more years and probably putting up really good numbers and it's strengthening his case even more. But when I look at him, I look at that and just think this guy is incredible as a Hall of Famer. 422 saves is up there high on the list. I look at some of the comps to him. Like you look at Bruce Sutter he's a Hall of Famer. He only put up 19 WAR for his career as a reliever, and Lee Smith put up 26 WAR. He's a Hall of Famer. So Billy Wagner's right in that category. Um, I I really think this guy. I really think this guy should be in. He's one of the best relievers ever, and he's did it for a long period of time, and he should be in there.
Yeah, I mean, like Matt said, right? You have to elect some relievers. You have to kind of switch your thresholds around per position. And I think you almost have to take a number of these cases into account somewhat differently. And we're going to start getting guys, I think, with different roles that are, more to the modern game that are going to change things up, right? Like, but for now, right, Billy Wagner is a role of a traditional closer who put up, over 400 saves. I don't know if we're going to get many guys after Jansen, Kimbrel, and Aroldis Chapman and maybe Josh Hader, who get more than like 400 saves, right? I mean, the way the relief pitcher role is changing, the way the volatility is hitting, and the injuries these guys are building up, right? I mean, the longevity of a guy like Billy Wagner to throw 900 innings, pick up over 1,000 strikeouts, 400 saves, like those numbers are going to be otherworldly in the future, and already his 900 innings of 2.3 ERA baseball, that's some of the best baseball you could possibly pull out of anybody, especially for those ninth innings. And yeah, right, he didn't get a ring or anything, but it's one of those things where relievers don't have so much control over that. You can only go out there and be the best reliever you can be, and Billy Wagner was one of the best of all time. So I think this one's an easy one. I think next year they will right the wrongs and put Billy Wagner in the Hall of Fame. And yeah, he had 124 strikeouts in 1999 and a 157 ERA, just in case you were wondering, his best year. So that's pretty nasty. and he not only did that, right? He did the 157 ERA, 124 strikeouts in 1999. Almost 11 or 12 years later in 2010, 143 ERA, 104 strikeouts, right? So he was doing it for a long time. That longevity, that's got to be rewarded in a Hall of Fame ballot where we're kind of bashing longevity with guys like Andrew Jones and Gary Sheffield, who played past their primes and they weren't so good late in their career. We gotta honor the guys who were able to maintain it all the way through, and I think Billy Wagner is exactly that.
Yeah, just absolutely filthy. And in the era of where you had that dedicated closer, was one of the best to ever do it. I don't know why he's not. And the people that use his 11.2 thirds innings of postseason baseball with a 9 ERA there as a reason not to vote for him, when if you look at like his expected FIP is like 328 in those ones, like I using those 11 innings to discount his 903 innings of what he's did in his major league career with 422 saves and having the absolute domination that he had. I mean, 1 year was over 3 ERA in his career, and that was in 2027 innings. He had a 6 ERA there, but it's in 27 innings. Like, who's to say that he doesn't come out in the other innings if he's not hurt and dominate that and then be just right in line here? Like, he should be in, and I hope that they make that next year, or his last year on the ballot next year, count that he gets in there. So let's jump up to the people that did make it. And the first person we had make it at 76.1% of the vote in his first year on the ballot is Joe Mauer. David and I both voted for Mauer. Matt did not. So Matt, what was your reasoning for not voting for Mauer? And did you think that he should be a Hall of Famer?
Well, I didn't vote for him, so
maybe you didn't wait for him to.
Yeah, I mean, I could be Joe Mauer and the guy we'll talk about in a minute, Todd Helton, were the two toughest for me on my ballot, and I didn't vote for either one of them, but they were the two that I was like really close and I just couldn't decide. But Joe Mauer is a really, really good player. I think that he is he's a guy that he was an elite contact hitter and he played catcher. So he was just a put up 53 WAR for his career. He was an awesome player. The only problem is that he got injured. He had concussion problems for a long time, and I don't like to smack a player for longevity. We just went through it with Andrew Jones and with um, uh, I'm blanking on who the other one we went through it a minute ago was, but I don't like smacking a player for longevity, but he only did it for like 8 years, and after that, he was more of kind of a league average-ish bat that was playing first base, and doing that got him enough hits to kind of get over that 2,000 hit threshold, but he only hit 143 home runs for his career. I mean, I could be convinced because I don't. The thing about injuries too is that I can understand why people would say, well, if he didn't get hurt, then he would have played 8 more years at the same level that he was already playing at. He'd be a inner circle Hall of Famer, and I don't disagree with that, but I think that the only way to judge it is kind of off of what actually happened. So um, as a whole, he's very, very close. Catcher is pretty underrepresented. although he played less than 2/3 of his games at catcher in his career, so it's not like he's one of these guys who is a catcher who caught 140 games a year for 15 years or something. He wasn't a full-time catcher for his career, even if it wasn't necessarily because he wasn't good at it. It was more of injuries, but I, I just find it difficult to. It's a difficult decision, but I just didn't vote for him this year. It was his first year. I bet that after a few years I would have come around on it, but I didn't vote for him year one because of that.
I think Mauer's case is really similar to Chase Utley's. Actually,
Yeah.
I think that you've got a guy who I was worried was going to be really underappreciated, right? Mauer's got a very similar catcher case to several guys who are going to be Hall of Famers in Buster Posey and Yadier Molina. Mauer's right there with them in terms of like wins above replacement, but he was able to do it in a much shorter time, right? He retired before Posey. He retired way before Molina, and he was as good a better hitter than both of those guys. And the kicker for Joe Mauer is that he was able to do that while he remained in Minnesota his whole career, right? Molina remained in St. Louis his whole career. Posey remained in San Francisco his whole career. Those three guys to me are all getting in the Hall of Fame, and they're all very comparable. And Mauer was the low man on the totem pole there. If Mauer didn't get in, it was going to be, is Buster Posey even going to get into the Hall of Fame? But now I think we're guaranteed.
Buster Posey played like 3 fewer seasons than Joe Mauer, by the way.
I think, but he's got more
Yeah.
wins above replacement. Like
Yeah.
he played them all at catcher, right? It's
Right.
this is gonna this sparks I think a really interesting prime over longevity solution to some of these things where we're going to be able to make more cases for guys like David Wright because Joe Mauer is now a Hall of Famer,
Yeah.
right? We've got evidence of the voters can see, hey, this guy was super good until he hit age 30, and yeah, he tailed off and he had to stop playing catcher. He had to stop doing the thing that made him so valuable that he won a major most valuable player award, which is the other thing I think that separates Mauer from Utley and made him kind of a slam dunk where Utley's more of a maybe. But Mauer's got that MVP. He's got that pedigree as the career twin. And I think you're also looking at Buster Posey's got an MVP. He's got the pedigree as the career giant. It's paving the way for guys like that to get in the Hall of Fame through this route of prime big, MVP award on there. And I think Mauer going in is really good for baseball because it'll enable those guys with a bit of a shorter career to make it in.
I want to bring up a couple of kind of counter arguments on a couple of those things. The first one is that that Mauer, yeah, he had a fantastic prime. I mean, his 2009 season, he had more than twice as many home runs in 2009 as he did the rest of his career, which is kind of crazy. I saw that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And he put up over 8 WAR. Like he was incredible in 2009 when he won MVP. But the thing about Chase Utley for me was he put up 5 consecutive seasons of more than 7 WAR, and Mauer had one in his entire career in 2009 when he put up more than 7 WAR. Like his career high outside of that was 6.4, which is awesome in 08. And he never had another 6 WAR season the rest of his career. So I mean that is one thing where like
You got
Utley's peak was like just unbelievably insane, whereas Mauer's was for 1 year unbelievably insane, but for for 5 or 6 years was just really good or elite. He was an elite player. Like don't get me wrong, but saying he was just really good but like it wasn't the same level of Chase Utley.
I disagree because catcher you have to you automatically play 20 to 30 less games, right? Just
Yeah.
from playing catcher, you have to take some days off and give it to your backup. And on top of that, Mauer got hurt in 2007, where he only played 109 games versus his typical 140 in that stretch. Otherwise, he would have had 5 straight years of 6 WAR, and at 6 WAR as a catcher versus in 140 games versus 7 WAR as a guy who played 160 games. That's kind of toss up for me. It's pretty much the same, and he had one injury in there that prevented it from working out. So catcher, what's more valuable, right? Catcher or second base? It's
Right.
catcher.
But they have
So
the positional adjustment for that. So
yeah, but it's catcher, right? Like he was
right.
the
That's
guy,
and it
so
boosts his WAR for just playing catcher too.
yeah.
But either way, I mean, I could have been persuaded on Mauer, and I probably would have been after a few years. And I don't think he's somebody who just doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. I think he was a Hall of Fame talent. So I'm not like, it's not one of those where like Omar Vizquel would have made me visibly angry if he was elected
Yeah.
to the Hall of Fame. But Joe Mauer, I'm like, I probably wouldn't have put him in there, but I think he's close and he's good enough. I'm not. It doesn't like make the Hall less. It makes the Hall less that Andrew Jones is not in and he's in, but it doesn't make the Hall less like you know respected because Joe
Mhm.
Mauer's in there. Like
Yeah.
he's good enough to be a Hall of Famer. Like it's just kind of a preference thing.
Yeah, I was also like David. I thought when Mauer retired, he was going to be super underappreciated. I thought that he was going to be a guy who meddled in the 20 to 30% range and just kind of stayed on the ballot for a long time, but never actually got the support to make it in. And you obviously heard of all the Hall of Goods talk, right after he retired, the year or two after. But I'm glad that the writers came around to realizing Mauer's value and just being one of the best pure hitters that the game has ever seen, and being able to understand the value he did bring as a catcher, and then what those concussions just did to his career, and still being able to be a serviceable first baseman there for a few years too. And I also think that what helped his case was staying in Minnesota his entire career.
Yeah.
Like that absolutely helps being a one place person, and being a Minnesota kid too as well. So I think that helps everything, and I'm just super glad that Joe Mauer's a Hall of Famer, and that we can always have that. So let's jump over to our next one, which was Todd Helton, like Matt mentioned earlier. In his 6th year on the ballot, jumps up to 79.7% of the vote, and overcame the Coors Field conspiracy that is around in our game. Matt, you didn't vote for him. You want to give your reasoning for why you don't think Todd Helton would be a Hall of Famer?
Well, you already mentioned it, the Coors Field thing, and I don't think that I don't totally hold Coors Field against players. Like I would have voted for Larry Walker. I think I mentioned Matt Holliday in our first little area that he was a guy that I would have considered. Like the thing about Todd Helton is that I think that his profile was probably propped up by Coors Field more than some others. He had a career 330 BABIP, which is very, very high, especially for somebody with his profile. 370 home runs, which is honestly a little bit lower than I would think for like a first baseman playing in Coors, but I won't hold that totally against him or anything. He put up 55 WAR. He was an incredible defensive first baseman, which really helps for me in his case. But if you look at his splits for his career, home versus away, his splits on his WRC plus at home was 136. His WRC plus on the road was 121, and he also was. That's just one of those things where I just think his batting average at home was 332, on the road 285, which is, I mean, batting average isn't that big of a deal, but it's kind of interesting to see that big of a split. But the thing with that is just I still don't know how to value cores and how it affects, because so much of the Hall of Fame is about counting stats, and for a lot of people, and I have a hard time with kind of a contact hitter who's got a very high BABIP kind of getting in off of that, where it's a tough one for me, because like I said, I could have I very well considered voting for him, but it's just I just have a hard time getting past that. And obviously, if it was the 10th year on the ballot, I might have been pursued. If he was about to fall off the ballot, I might have changed my mind. But I think that for now I was going to keep him off.
Yeah, Adrian Beltre was a better hitter at home than he was away. That's what I was looking for.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
I just look Matt. It's easier than you think, right? WRC Plus takes into account stadium where they played, park adjusted, right? He had 4 seasons, 160 WRC Plus. I was looking for like contact first baseman to kind of analyze this against, and I found one named Freddie Freeman. Freddie's probably gonna sit into the Hall of Fame cat talk here soon. I think he's
maybe 1 or 2 seasons away from just being an absolute slam dunk, and I think he'll be even better than that. And Freddie Freeman has, barring the 2020 season where they only played 60 games, has one career WRC plus season above 160, right? And Todd Helton did it 4 times. And had a peak right there with the guys we've discussed already. With you're looking at 5-6 year peaks. Todd Helton was putting up 6, 7, 8 WAR in his peak. He hit 49 home runs in 2001. The issue for Todd Helton was always going to be that he was playing at the same time as those guys who had PEDs. As far as we know, Todd Helton was clean, right? And effectively, his PED of playing in that era was playing at Coors Field. And if you look at the park adjusted stats, it completely backs up that Todd Helton was still a really good hitter, right? It's not telling you that 372 batting average in 2000 was, equivalent to hitting 372 in, Petco Park all the time, right? It's not quite the same thing, but WRC Plus is 4, and WRC Plus still said he had a Hall of Fame peak. He played for a really long time. He got the counting stats up, and then I certainly, when we already talked about it, I don't want to bash him for playing until he was 39 years old, right? I mean, he was certainly not playing at a Hall of Fame level after like 2007. He played for 5 more years. I'm not going to bash him for that. He ended up getting over 350 home runs. He ended up getting to, 55 WAR. He got to 2,500 hits. Like I think he played long enough to reach some of those milestones, and his peak was easily a Hall of Fame peak. And I remember him fondly as a kid, right? I grew up with this guy being one of those dominant first basemen that, everybody feared. Every time you went to Colorado, you feared him. And even when he was an old man, he still walked just as much as he struck out. He was an approach guy who was really, really good at just hitting the baseball. And he ended up with a career 132 WRC plus, which is right there in line with some of the other guys we've talked about in this discussion. So for me, Todd Helton was a slam dunk Hall of Famer. He has been the whole time. I'm really glad he finally got in. And, like I said, Matt Holliday's on this ballot, right? Coors, I'm not just propping him up for Coors because he was a better hitter than Matt Holliday. He was for his whole career. That's why I care about Todd Helton more than Matt Holliday. So, it makes more sense to me on that front. But, yeah, I mean, I'm glad for Todd Helton. I'm really happy for him. This is awesome. And he's just coaching at Tennessee right now. And
Todd Helton actually had a lower career WRC plus than Matt Holliday, but either way,
he played for a much longer time,
That is true. But yeah, I mean, and like I said, I don't want to totally just toss somebody out because they played in Coors and stuff. Like that's not what I'm getting at. Like, and I don't know. I just think it's very. I think this one was very difficult for me, and like I say, probably would have put him on eventually, but he had more years if it didn't put him on this year. But I didn't think it was. I'm not quite as impressed, and I'm a small hall guy. So,
yeah, to me, we always mention playing at Coors Field helps you, right? Like because of the higher altitude there, the ballpark's bigger, so more hits land, which is where your higher comes in there, Matt. What I don't think is mentioned enough is what it does to you as a road player. Consistently having to change back and forth from altitude to no altitude and what pitches do at different places. Like sliders and curveballs don't break as much in Coors because of the elevation. Well, when you go out of Coors, if you're playing there for 82 games, you're playing 82 games trying to adjust back to what it's like at normal elevations too. And nobody brings up that aspect of it too. And obviously home numbers are most of the time going to be better than road numbers, regardless of the player you look at anyways. I look at Todd Helton's career, he has over 2,500 hits there, but you look at his away numbers, he's a 833 OPS, a 121 WRC plus, still hit 285 with close to a 400 on base percentage there. Like if he played his career, a full career outside of Coors Field at a different place there, and he put up those numbers, I think we're looking at a guy that's a Hall of Famer no matter what. Mm-hmm. And then now we're talking about the numbers that he did. He put up more numbers at Coors, which is expected, but like I don't think that like taking Coors Field where he plays and using that against him as much, and also not using the flip side of playing away from Coors, as a player who has to play there every single day and still putting up the numbers that Todd Helton put up, to me, Todd Helton screams that he's a Hall
Yeah.
of Famer.
I'll say one more thing about it is that I think that what I consider Todd Helton's career, even throwing Coors out, which y'all consider his career, is a little bit different. I mean, I'm probably too much of a sucker for, just, positional value and stuff. But I look at him and compare him to other first basemen who are in the Hall of Fame, even where he was very, very similar to kind of the baseline of first baseman in the Hall of Fame. You look at guys like Fred McGriff, it was a real similar number of, real similar WAR, similar case. He had more home runs, fewer hits, that kind of thing. But guys like that, where I don't think Todd Helton was just a slam dunk without the Coors thing. Like I probably would have been more likely to put him in with the Coors thing, but I think that I think that was kind of more of a tiebreaker for me than a disqualifying him for Coors. That's just where I'm coming from. So
My other thing on this is that I think you can probably also use this to say, hey, maybe we should be giving a little more thought to some of these guys who are really good for a longer chunk that were able to put up a good time, like Matt Holliday. I mentioned Lance Berkman earlier. You mentioned Fred McGriff. Like, I wonder if, Carlos Delgado's not a Hall of Famer, right? Like a lot of these guys are who were dominant for a really short period and then kind of played their way out of being a career really good player. Um, I think maybe we need to give a little more evaluation to that. But for my money, I mean, the 2004 or the 2000 to 2004, 2005 Todd Helton, that dude was a monster, and I'm glad
yeah,
he's finally getting his due.
say Lance Berkman, I think it's a better case than Helton, honestly. But
I think we can even raise
pretty
it. I think
ridiculous.
Helton was the guy, but Berkman should have gotten some
I was gonna
looks, and
say
he didn't.
Berkman should be in. I mean, he had a 144 career WRC plus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Insane.
with no steroid
Yeah,
accusations, like it's
yeah, and it's not like
it's
he
one of those
retired
things.
young or something either. Like he was
No.
playing till he was 37.
I,
Well,
I think
they didn't even give Jason Giambi the time of day either. I thought Giambi was at least
Well,
like worth a look.
Eh,
he had his own PED stuff. So I understand that. But I mean, if we're looking at Berkman, McGriff, Helton, they're all around the same like war type player there. Like I think all of those should be in the Hall of Fame, really. And I'm glad that Helton finally got in, and I hope that especially as it goes forward here, not that we're going to have many people that are going to be lifer Coors Field players with how bad the Rockies are recently, but like we're going to have this conversation about Nolan Arenado here in 10 or 15 years whenever he's on the ballot too, although he's going to have the St. Louis years on it. Like I hope that by that time we understand what Coors Field and what that actually means to a player and like what their life is like there and what it's like away from Coors Field too. Like I hope that that's more of a conversation here because I feel like it's not talked about enough, especially in a case like Todd Helton here. And we'll get into that here once we get to the Nolan Arenado years and whatever. So anyways, let's move on to the last person that made it into the Hall of Fame on his first year on the ballot. Adrian Beltre got a whopping 95.1% of the votes. I mean, we all voted for him here. I think it was a absolute lock Hall of Famer. Adrian Beltre deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. First year, first ballot Hall of Famer. 95% of the vote too. So, what do you guys sum up of Adrian Beltre's career and just what made him such a lock for a first year Hall of Fame?
yeah, well, I'll say this: anyone who didn't vote for Adrian Beltre should be embarrassed for themselves. They really should, because there's absolutely zero argument against him. He's one of the best defensive third basemen of all time. He had over 3,000 hits, which is pretty much a lock to put you in the Hall of Fame unless you're a PED user. He hit 477 home runs. He had his peak year in 2004. He put up almost 10 WAR. He had his
Don't
years where
remind me of that year.
he had an incredible year, and then he had in Texas, after he had a few years in a very difficult. We just talked about Coors, but Seattle's a very difficult ballpark who didn't really fit his style of hitting either.
He's still
He
decent there, but
he was. I mean, look at 2006 in Seattle. He put up 4.6 WAR. and people were complaining about it. But after he went to Boston, a much easier hitters park, 6.4 WAR, and then he just tore it up for the Rangers on some really good Rangers teams, like 2011, 2012. He played in the World Series in 2011. Like this guy was, or so, this guy should be an easily slam dunk first ballot. Should have been unanimous. I don't understand him not being unanimous. It's like, I mean, some of these guys who have not, who some one person didn't vote for, just it boggles my mind how that person is a baseball writer. But anyways, Adrian Beltre, unless for whatever reason you didn't like that he didn't like getting touched on the head or something. Like that's another thing about him too. The guy was just an absolute character and was a clubhouse leader. Everyone liked him. He's probably the most likable player of all time. Like everyone liked Adrian Beltre. I don't see how you could not like Adrian Beltre.
Before David jumps in here, if you just go watch Adrian Beltre and Elvis Andrews compilations on YouTube and you don't think the guy should be a Hall of Famer just based off that, then just get out of here.
We've said the statistics, right? Adrian Beltre is a slam dunk, right? I just want to give my personal favorite Adrian Beltre story quickly, which is that one time, it was late in his career, he was at this point an old man, was not willing to take any crap from anybody. He wanted to stand closer to the home plate to get a better look at the pitcher.
Oh man!
He is not in the on deck circle. He is about 5 feet away from it. He was not far away from it at all. And some old ass second base ump starts yelling at him and trying to get him back in the on deck circle. And he's not hurting anybody. He's probably already done it in the game. And for whatever reason, the umps decides it's his time to step in and stop this this batter out here who's not standing in the on deck circle. And Adrian Beltre looks at him and says, "Okay," reaches down, grabs the on deck circle, drags it 5 feet to where he was standing, and gets thrown out of the game. And it's just so funny because he was, at this point, he was like 37 or 38. He was not taking any crap. He was just like, "All right, fine. I don't want to play anymore anyway." And just goes to the dugout. It's amazing.
I was going to say, wasn't that like one of his only like 2 or 3 ejections in his entire career too? Like,
something like that, yeah.
He was such a mild-mannered guy. He was so funny, and I love Adrian Beltre so much, and I'm really glad he's a Hall of Famer. And my one concern is he wasn't unanimous. There's no benefit to being unanimous anymore. We couldn't even get Ken Griffey Jr. unanimous.
Yeah.
Ichiro's not going to be unanimous. And the first writer that doesn't vote for Ichiro is going to get a earful from me. I tell you that, man. Ichiro is so awesome. And it's one of those where Beltre and Ichiro back-to-back years. I mean, 2 totally deserving guys. I'm so excited for him. But, oh, my God, the first guy that doesn't vote for Ichiro is going to he's going to bite it, man. I swear to God.
All right, save that cursing-infused rant for next year. No, I will never forgive the Frank McCourt era for making the Dodgers trade Adrian Beltre after that 2004 season where he put up 9.7 WAR and 48 homers and 121 RBIs while hitting 334 there with a 161 WRC plus. Like that will forever be one of him and Pedro Martinez of like the 2 that, like, man, what if there. But those Seattle years, you kind of always wondered what was going to happen with him. And because that park is so hard to play in for the type of player that Beltre was. And I was so ecstatic when he got to Boston, and then the Texas years where he just really exploded there. And then I feel like that's really the Texas years when they were good. You got to see more of the character Beltre really is too. Once he finally got into his 30s there, he kind of started showing that a little bit more. You still saw it a little bit with Seattle and that, but man, I'm so glad that he got into the Hall of Fame and is getting the love he deserves, because he was one of the most fun players to watch, and he never really was too flashy. He was just really good all the time, and never one that really was on the highlight reel all the time. But man, I'm so happy that he got in and got the love, and definitely should have been a unanimous Hall of Famer, even though it doesn't really matter, but it still irks me. But anyways, so looking at your 2024 MLB Hall of Fame class, it is Adrian Beltre, Todd Helton, and Joe Mauer. 3 of the guys got in. Gary Sheffield falls off the ballot. So next year we'll be looking at guys like Billy Wagner and then the host of new people, including Ichiro. And I believe CC's on the ballot next year too. So
I just had the list. Let me find it.
Yeah, I've got it right here.
yeah.
So next year you got CC Sabathia, Ichiro, Ian Kinsler, Dustin Pedroia, but they all have kind of legit cases. And then
Yep.
you've also got Troy Tulowitzki, Adam Jones, Brian McCann, and Carlos Gonzalez, who will be on there. They won't get in, but they're
Ben,
going to be on there as guys to mention. So
did you say Ben Zobrist and Felix Hernandez?
I did not. Is Felix on there
Both
next
both
year?
of them. Yeah, Felix is on there next year, and so is Curtis
Okay.
Granderson and Russell Martin and Brian McCann.
Yeah, I did say Brian McCann, but
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interesting arguments, and it's once
Yeah.
again going to test the 10 player max, because you've still got some guys held over that I think deserve spots, and a bunch of those new guys deserve some consideration for spots, and you got to vote for Ichiro. So
Yeah, Russell Martin locked Hall of Fame vote next year. Anyways, before we wrap this up, in the next, I believe, well, our plan right now is for just scheduling wise. I think we're planning for the 5th to be the next episode. Is that
Mhm.
correct here?
Yes.
Okay, so looking at February 5th, that will be our free agency kind of off-season wrap-up. We hope that we have a ton of news. By that time, we hope that Cody Bellinger, Blake Snell, Matt Chapman, and all the rest of the big free agents have gone, and we're really hoping that we have the floodgates opened. There's been kind of trickling here the past few days, past week or so, but really, really hoping to get some big time free agents by that time. And then February 12th, we will start our division breakdowns, and that will last every week. So starting the 5th, February 5th, we'll be back to weekly episodes on Mondays. And then February 12th through March 18th, we're going to be doing division breakdowns, one division every week. And then March 25th will be our predictions episode. And we'll keep this going as, updating it per every episode. But a lot of fun content going to be coming forward to you guys. So thank you guys for tuning into this one. Stay locked into all of the social media channels, and hope to see you guys back here in a couple weeks.